The iron hooves of the Mongols once swept across the Eurasian continent, using the curved sabers in their hands to conquer vast territories and establish the enormous Mongol Empire. Wherever they went, they forced submission or utterly destroyed their enemies. In the West, on the battlefield, the Mongols were invincible and rarely encountered opponents who could resist them. Yet in the East, their campaigns did not go so smoothly. They suffered significant losses against 3 opponents. One was the Southern Song, well known to all, where even Mongol Khan himself perished. Another was Japan, where the Japanese forces, sheltering behind their fortifications, could not be swiftly broken. The Mongols were forced to retreat after devastating typhoons struck their fleets. The third was today's main subject, Vietnam. Today, let us see why the Mongols, mobilizing 300,000 troops, were broken into pieces, and why the conquerors of the world suffered repeated defeats in Vietnam. In the year 1234, after the Mongols destroyed the Jin dynasty, they came into direct contact with the Southern Song and soon launched attacks. Confronted by the fierce Mongol army, the Southern Song troops retreated again and again. Yet even so, the Mongols could not break through the defensive lines of eastern Sichuan, unable to advance deeper. Because of this, the Mongols adjusted their strategy, adopting the scheme of Wo Fu, planning to detour through Tibet to Yunnan, and from Yunnan directly strike the heartland of the Southern Song. However, the plan did not progress smoothly until Mongke succeeded to the throne. He appointed Khubilai as commander and Uriyangqadai as deputy, ordering them to lead the army from the Sichuan route to attack Dali and Jiaoji, thereby threatening Huguang from the flank. Khubilai did not disappoint. In 1253, he successfully secured the submission of Tibet and destroyed the Dali kingdom. The following year, Khubilai returned north, leaving Uriyangqadai to continue conquering the Yunnan region. Not long afterward, the Mongol army fully subdued Yunnan, creating a strategic threat to the Southern Song. However, behind the Mongols' desire to swallow the Southern Song lurked a hidden danger: Annan, the state known today as Northern Vietnam. At that time, Vietnam was divided. Central Vietnam was the independent Champa Kingdom, while the southern region belonged to the Khmer-controlled Water Chenla. Thus, the power dealing with China historically was essentially Northern Vietnam, Annan. Annan bordered Yunnan and could at any time launch raids against the rear of the Mongol army. More crucially, Annan maintained close ties with the Southern Song, nominally as a vassal state. They frequently reported the Mongols' movements to the Song court, requested archery and artillery craftsmen for support, and even hoped that the Song would dispatch troops to jointly resist the Mongols. The Southern Song responded to Annan's plea, sending 100 craftsmen, 2,000 portions of grain, and a unit of elite soldiers to guard the frontier against Mongol incursions. From this, a strategic alliance of resistance was formed. This alliance could not be underestimated. Once the Mongols attacked the Southern Song, Annan would strike from behind, becoming a major obstacle along the Mongols' path. Therefore, the Mongols decided to first subdue Annan before launching a full assault on the Southern Song. Of course, relying solely on the limited forces sent by the Southern Song was insufficient to threaten the Mongol army. Annan's own strength was the key, and indeed, Annan's military was not weak. They imitated the Tang dynasty's fubing system and the Song dynasty's Jinjin structure, adapting them to their reality, and developed a national conscription defense system. This system even influenced the Song dynasty in return, inspiring the Song to create new military organizational units. By the time the Mongols marched south against Annan, their military system had further improved. Both the standing and local forces were larger than before. According to the official Vietnamese chronicle, The Complete Annals of Đại Việt, during the Trần dynasty, Annan could mobilize 1 million people with a standing force of 200,000 combining navy and infantry. This was no small number. For comparison, the Crusades in Europe only fielded about 30,000 to 40,000 men. But war is never decided solely by numbers. Logistics, equipment, and tactics matter even more. For the people of Annan, Mongol weapons and tactics were the greatest threat. Mongol cavalry excelled at mounted archery, inflicting heavy casualties with arrows, rarely rushing recklessly into melee. They skillfully used the agility of their horses for guerrilla strikes, avoiding direct clashes with hard targets. Once they entered enemy territory, they plundered and massacred freely. If the opportunity was absent, they retreated afar, waiting to ambush when the enemy withdrew. For Annan, their disadvantage in mobility was undeniable. Yet, they held the home field advantage and possessed ample manpower, so they were not necessarily intimidated by the Mongols. In the year 1257, Uriyangqadai led the Mongol army to assemble north of Annan. This marked the beginning of the Allied campaign in the first month of the year. Since ancient times, a just cause was necessary for great undertakings. Therefore, the Mongols first sent 2 envoys to meet the king of Annan, demanding submission. Yet the king of Annan not only rejected this demand but also detained and cruelly mistreated the 2 envoys. This immediately provided the Mongol army with a pretext for invasion. Uriyangqadai quickly arranged his troops, while on the other side Annan also deployed its forces on land and water to resist. By December, the 2 armies formally clashed. At the outset, the Annanese troops were shaken by the overwhelming might of the Mongol forces. Uriyangqadai's son Aju took the opportunity to crush Annan's navy, while Uriyangqadai himself broke through their land defenses. The following day, the armies fought again, and the Annanese were defeated repeatedly. The Mongols seized the chance to approach the capital of Annan, rescuing the 2 envoys who had been abused for many days. One of them, gravely injured, could not be saved and died. The Mongol army, enraged, massacred the city's inhabitants. A few days later, unable to endure the oppressive heat of Annan, the Mongol soldiers withdrew from the capital. At the same time, however, they sent envoys once again to demand Annan's submission. Yet Vietnamese records of this war present an almost entirely opposite version, claiming that the Annanese forces defeated the Mongols and forced them to retreat. But according to the Southern Song scholar Li Zhengbo in his Kejai Hulu, which preserved documents from Annan sent to the Southern Song court, it can be confirmed that the official Vietnamese chronicles were exaggerating. In fact, Uriyangqadai had not been driven out. After withdrawing from the capital, he did not depart the region, but instead led his forces to the frontier, where he maintained strict discipline without disturbing the populace, displaying an intention to occupy Annan for the long term. At first, King Tran Nan Tong of Annan was enraged by the devastation of his land and angrily sent the Mongol envoys back bound in ropes. But later, when new envoys arrived demanding that Tran Nan Tong submit and pay tribute, the king, after calming down, finally agreed. The 2 sides agreed upon tribute every 3 years. Only then did Uriyangqadai withdraw his army from Annan. It is clear that the core purpose of this Mongol invasion was to secure the rear in preparation for the attack on the southern Song, not to conquer Annan outright. Thus, once the Mongols received the promise of submission, they naturally withdrew. This battle was essentially a crushing defeat for Annan, though the Mongols could not adapt to the stifling climate and the cost of direct occupation was too high. These 2 factors later became important advantages for Annan in resisting Mongol invasions. In the year 1262, Yuan Shizu Kublai proposed establishing a Daragachi in Annan, who would also serve as an official holding the seal of authority to supervise local affairs. To avoid provoking the Yuan dynasty, Annan temporarily agreed, but the Yuan court did not stop there. By 1267, they further raised 6 demands. First, that Annan's army be placed under Yuan, appointed political officials. Second, that members of the royal family be sent to the Yuan court as hostages. Third, that a census of the population be conducted. Fourth, that troops be dispatched for service when required. Fifth, that tribute taxes be paid as prescribed. And sixth, that Annan continue to accept the rule of the Daragachi. This was clearly an attempt to tighten control over Annan. This time, Annan did not yield. Apart from agreeing to pay tribute and to accept the Daragachi, the kingdom firmly rejected all other demands. At that time, the Yuan war against the southern Song was at its peak, and the court had no energy to deal with Annan. The matter was temporarily set aside. In 1275, Annan proactively requested the dismissal of the Daragachi. To the Yuan court, this was intolerable arrogance, and so they considered using force to destroy Annan. They sent agents to survey the frontier terrain, while once again presenting the 6 demands, which the king of Annan again refused. In 1279, the Yuan court attempted to support Tran Di, the uncle of King Tran Nan Tong, as the new ruler of Annan, dispatching 1,000 soldiers to escort him back in hopes of controlling the country through him. But Khubilai Khan had underestimated Annan's determination to defend its independence and overestimated the terror of the Mongol cavalry. The king of Annan executed Tran Di outright, declaring that he would never submit to Khubilai. From that point, the Yuan's plan to conquer Annan formally began. The first step was to use the pretext of attacking Champa, requesting permission to pass through Annan. Annan immediately saw through the Yuan court's true intention and decisively refused, deploying troops at key strategic locations within its territory to strengthen defenses. Once their ruse was exposed, the Yuan resolved to employ force, but in order to maintain the appearance of a just cause, after breaching 2 strategic passes in Annan, the Yuan first sent envoys demanding that the king of Annan open a passage. When refused, they sent another envoy and again were rejected. Using this as a pretext, the Yuan army launched a full-scale invasion of Annan. In 1284, Prince of Zhenan, Toghan, once again led his army into Annan. He divided his forces into 6 routes, intending to occupy the country completely. At the beginning of the first lunar month, the Yuan forces inflicted a crushing defeat on Prince Trần Hưng Đạo in the Noi Ban Gorge, forcing him to flee to Van Kip. On the 6th day of the first month, the Yuan attacked near Van Kip. On the 12th, the Yuan advanced to the northern bank of the Phu Lung River and encamped. King Trần Nhân Tông of Annan personally arrived, leading Jin Rui's Sacred Wing army and bringing with him 1,000 warships to support Prince Hưng Đạo. The two sides faced each other across the river, but before long Trần Nhân Tông fled the battlefield. Meanwhile, Yuan General Omar had completed mopping up operations in the occupied regions. Anyone discovered with characters marked on walls opposing the Yuan were executed without mercy, a display of overwhelming harshness. In the end, Prince Hưng Đạo stationed Trang Kai to guard the line of defense against further assaults from Yuan General Sogetu. By the second month, Toghan marched south and captured Than Hoa. On the 3rd day of the second month, he encamped at the Dai Huang River. The Marquis of Annan, Tran Kien, Prince Chiao Dao, surrendered with his entire family. The defensive lines arranged in the Yuan rear by the Annan troops proved ineffective. On the main front, Toghan won successive victories, driving the Annan forces into disarray. After Omar and Toghan joined forces, Toghan once again divided his army. One force moved by water under Li Heng, another advanced by land, and under the command of Xingdu continued southward directly toward Thien Truong Prefecture. Trần Nhân Tông was again defeated and fled. The Yuan pursuers did not halt, chasing him all the way to Zhaohai estuary, but could no longer find his whereabouts. In the 3rd month, Toghan, citing that Prince Hưng Dao's forces still held Van Kip, Suo Vayan, Shihui River, and other positions, requested reinforcements from the Yuan court. In the 4th month, reinforcements pursued deeper, but suffered defeat at Xianziguan. Traditionally, the Battle of Xianziguan is considered the turning point when Annan shifted from defense to counter-offense. The reinforcements eventually retreated under Annan's fierce strikes. However, Yuan records give different reasons for the withdrawal. They state that Annan's forces grew larger as the fighting continued, while the Yuan reinforcements, engaged in constant battles, were exhausted. Moreover, Mongol cavalry could not employ their best tactics in Annan's rugged terrain. The humid and hot climate also caused epidemics to spread through the troops, forcing withdrawal. This explanation was not without truth. As noted earlier, Annan's standing army numbered only 200,000, but they could mobilize over 1 million reservists. In contrast, the reinforcements lacked sufficient numbers. Although later accounts exaggerated that the Yuan had deployed 500,000, this was Vietnamese embellishment. The actual combat force was far fewer. According to related documents such as those concerning the Song-Yuan Wars, the ratio of laborers to combat soldiers was about 4:1. At that time, the Yuan had just subdued the southern Song, and their logistics were far weaker than during the Song-Yuan Wars. Securing supply routes alone consumed many troops, and foraging locally was impossible. Thus, the Yuan had only a little over 100,000 combat soldiers in Annan, but with logistics and escort personnel included, the total reached 500,000 to 600,000, mobilizing about 700,000 people in all. Once inside Annan, the Yuan forces split and stationed at various points. Yet, facing nearly nationwide resistance from the Annan populace, the Yuan found themselves isolated. Vietnam's forests covered about 150,000 square kilometers, half of the country's land, with 2/3 concentrated in the north. Such terrain was highly unfavorable to Mongol cavalry. Epidemics in the army were also common. Liu Bei and Cao Cao had experienced this in history. Annan lay even farther south than Jiangdong, its climate hotter still. For steppe-born Mongol soldiers, unable to endure such conditions was only natural. Nonetheless, Yuan records downplayed the defeats, avoiding detailed accounts. According to the Grand Canon of the capital, the reinforcements were in fact forced to retreat under a powerful encirclement by Annan's army, withdrawing from the capital only after heavy fighting. Toghan himself was surrounded, escaping only with great difficulty, while Sogetu was not so fortunate. During the hasty retreat, Sogetu was not timely informed, and he ultimately died in battle in Annan. Even so, Annan feared that the Yuan might launch another massive invasion, so they returned the remnants of Sogetu's troops to the Yuan court, hoping to negotiate peace. In simple terms, Annan, after victory, boasted proudly, while the Yuan, ashamed of their loss, recorded events with restraint. The reason for Annan's success, as is often said, lay in the unity of favorable timing, geography, and people. Each was indispensable. The defeat of the reinforcements in Annan enraged Khubilai. Even though Annan sent back Sogetu's shattered army, it did not shake his determination to conquer the country. In the 23rd year of the Yuan dynasty, in 1286, in the first month, the Yuan once again launched an invasion of Annan. Yet in May, King Tren Yantong abandoned his capital once more, and by June the Yuan army had already withdrawn from Annan. In November 1287, the Yuan army once again marched on Annan with 100,000 troops. After the Prince of Genan's forces arrived at Simingzhou, he first dispatched 2,500 men to guard the supplies, then divided the army into 4 routes. One route invaded from Yongping, another advanced from Yoyiguan, Ainamquan, a third was led by Omar through the waterways, and the last was commanded personally by the Prince of Genan. Regarding the outcomes of these 4 forces, Vietnamese and Chinese records diverge sharply. The Yuan Shi, Annan Zuan, records that the Yuan army fought continuously along the way, once again capturing the capital of Annan and fully displaying its military might and strategic superiority. But in the Vietnamese Dai Viet Su Ki Ton Thu, although the power of the Annanese army is mentioned only briefly, there is detailed record of 4 critical battles in which the Tran forces claimed victory, asserting that these triumphs played a decisive role in resisting the invaders. The first was the Battle of Lingjingguan, commanded by the Marquis of Jinda, who cleverly used poisoned ships to severely wound the enemy, causing heavy casualties and ultimately winning the battle. Next was the Battle of Jumu Bay, where the Marquis of Rende used strategy to defeat the Mongol Yuan navy, causing many of the invaders to perish. Large amounts of spoils were seized, including prisoners, weapons, and siege ladders. At the Battle of Datanku, the Prince of Shandao together with the Nguyen clan's loyalist forces fought side by side. With excellent coordination and fierce spirit, the Tran forces again defeated the invaders. Most striking was the naval battle at Van Don, commanded by Tran Qingyu, Prince Nan Hua, Tran Khan Du, Tran Qingyu. This battle was recorded in detail by Wu Shilian, who emphasized its decisive role in the entire war. Ren Huai Prince successfully crushed the Yuan army's grain transport fleet, capturing countless provisions and equipment, gravely crippling the enemy's supply line and striking a heavy blow to their combat strength and morale. According to Vietnamese records, the Yuan forces suffered utter defeat, unable to strike back. Yet aside from the Van Don naval battle, Yuan records make no mention of these clashes. Considering the earlier wars, it is not difficult to infer the reason both sides engaged in propaganda, magnifying their own victories. In truth, the Annanese did indeed defeat the invaders in several battles, but these were not decisive enough to change the overall outcome. The Yuan forces pressed on, capturing the capital of Annan for the third time with ease. As before, Annan mounted stubborn resistance, even in the capital, while aiming attacks at the Yuan supply lines. At the time, responsible for transporting provisions was Song General Zhang, Fan Wenhu. He first repelled Annanese naval forces that tried to cut off supplies, but later, when faced with a massive fleet from Annan, realizing he was outmatched, he leapt into the water to escape. The Dai Viet Shiji, however, claimed that the Yuan forces were decisively defeated, with endless provisions and equipment seized, many soldiers captured, and that Fan Wenhu himself was taken prisoner. Whether or not he was actually captured remains disputed, but what is certain is that while most Mongol soldiers eventually returned to camp, the supply of grain failed to arrive on time, forcing a retreat. From the records of both sides, the Vietnamese believed they had won the war, while the Mongols believed that although Annan was forced into submission, they had not truly lost. In fact, both accounts contain elements of truth. The outcome still hinged on three traditional factors: timing, terrain, and human effort. In terms of timing, the Yuan deliberately launched their attack in November, hoping to fight in the cooler season. But once April came and the heat returned, the Mongol soldiers could not withstand the humid climate, and their fighting ability plummeted. In terms of terrain, Annan's mountains and rainforests placed the Mongol cavalry at a disadvantage. They could not exploit their mobility and tactics, reduced at most to the role of messengers. The strategies that had brought them invincibility on the steppe were useless here. Most crucial was human effort. Annan practiced nationwide mobilization, with all people resisting the invaders. The power of such resistance against foreign aggression cannot be underestimated. Moreover, the southern Song had only just fallen to the Yuan. Many refugees fled to Annan, bringing not only manpower but also knowledge and technology, which greatly strengthened Annan's capacity to resist.